Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the world. Sweet the rain's new fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, sprung in completeness where God's feet pass. Ours is the sunlight, ours is the morning, born of the one light, Eden saw play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day.
So, good afternoon and welcome to this place, to this gathering, to this holy time and holy place. And whatever holy place you're joining us from, your living room, your kitchen table, this sanctuary, if we've learned anything in these last months, we've learned that everything's holy now. My name is Beverly Brazier, and I am privileged to be in ministry with the fine people of Whitehorse United Church, and I'm more privileged to be here today. This is an intimate time for you, I know, and I thank you more than I can say that you've asked me to participate today. It is most certainly not my pleasure, but it is my honor. And I come here, first of all, in profound gratitude for the gift of life, for the gift of this day, for every day, for every breath, because as we know all too well, it might have been otherwise. For the mystery of things, that life and love endure in ways that are beyond our understanding. For this land, the traditional land of the Kwanlin First Nation and the Taanquatchin Council. But most of all today, in profound gratitude for the lives of two people, Joy Waters, David Neufeld, whose names we speak with respect and gratitude and honor and love, and whose light will shine on and on. And maybe I have some help in lighting and helping all the people remember. Remember who's going first? Oh, okay. Okay, and you got this one. And then you remember what you're going to do. Ripple down your mouth. So as you can see, this service is a very Joy and David-ish kind of service. We're sitting around a campfire. That's what we're going to be doing. And you're going to hear stories. A couple of years ago, we did a funeral planning, plan your own funeral workshop. And we had the notes that Joy took and that David took from that service, from that workshop. And Joy's had a list of goals for the service, and a list of, I know, and yeah, and a list of hymns, so not exactly alphabetized, but, you know, and a list of readings. And David's paper was blank, except for one word, storytelling. So we're trying to honor both of them today. So this service is going to take the pattern of story, song, reading, repeat, something like that. And that's why. So the songs will be sung by the singers. You know, right now, COVID is a complete sentence. Songs will be sung by the singers only, COVID. And that's just how it has to be. So we're going to start this with story time, and that's going to be with Paula.
It's hard to get off. Is the mic the right distance from? We're good? Okay. By nature and by profession, David was a storyteller. And I can't think of a better way to honor his life than by sharing the stories that have enriched our lives. This is also a bit daunting. David, Joy, Aaron, and Andrew were important members of my Yukon family. We raised our children together, and I have a treasure trove of memories to draw upon. And that's the place that I'll begin, with just a few of the more memorable highlights. There was the New Year's Eve when it was minus 50, and we rang in the new year by throwing boiling water into the air, and with Dave's encouragement, paddled a canoe down the driveway. On another occasion, while camping in Skagway, David actually convinced Joy and I that it was perfectly okay to give our kids, then aged 9 to 12, $50 so they could have a night in the town while we enjoyed an adult-only gourmet meal at the Stowaway. And then there was the time that David offered to cremate the frozen bodies of Eli's pet rats that had been stored in the bottom of our freezer. Joy selected the music to match the solemnity of the event, something by Wagner, and David built a funeral pyre, gave the eulogy, and then a few days later presented us with the ashes in a gift box. Of course, there were many more wonderful moments that involved many of you that are here today in the sanctuary or live streaming us. We had so many times rented the entire Kluane B&B and spent our days hiking and our nights feasting, telling stories, laughing, of course, fueled by an impressive amount of wine. I think our largest count was 27 liters. A highlight for me was the year that David and Andrew led 5 of us, all first-timers, over the Chilkoot Trail. David orchestrated frequent short breaks over the 4 days, during which he shared interesting tidbits of the history of the gold rush. He had a talent for giving just the right amount of information at the right time. I remember thinking, if only I had been taught history in that way when I was in school. I also remember that I knew I would never have hiked the Chilkoot were it not for David taking the helm and Andrew taking the rear. Together, they created a security blanket inspiring us and motivating us and making sure we got to each of our destinations on time. The last story I'd like to share is in some ways more ordinary, but I think reveals so much about David and his values. My sister and her family of 4 were visiting from New York, and I asked David if he would take us on a river trip to Egg Island. I considered this a pretty big ask, but David jumped in right away, and we struck a deal. I would cover gas and food, and he would make all the other arrangements. It was a glorious Yukon day, and as was his style, David entertained us with interesting stories of the history and natural history of the river. His ability to hit the right notes made the day, even for my nephews who were captivated. As you would know if you have gone on a river trip with David, he was meticulous in his preparations. Safety first, comfort next, then fun. It had been a long day for all of us, but especially so for David, for all the preparations he made. When we arrived back at the boat launch at Rotary Park, we learned that there was a search and rescue operation underway for a man who had been swept away by the current. David got us to land, and without a moment's hesitation, left in his boat to join the search party. David was a storyteller, a family man, a good friend, an outdoor enthusiast, and a lifelong Boy Scout. But most of all, David was a good and decent man who gave of his time and knowledge freely, and who was always the first to lend a helping hand. I will miss David's kindness, generosity, and yes, even his quirkiness, which challenged convention, engaged my curiosity, and created so many wonderful memories. May his memory be a blessing to us all.
Hello. My first recollection of David was in Winnipeg shortly after my transfer to the Chilkoot Trail in the fall of 1988. A younger David with longer hair, his drooping mustache, bundled up in a heavy wool sweater, funky fur hat, and moose hide beaded mitts with the string that holds them together, came up and introduced himself to me. Who was this crunchy granola hippie type, I thought? Well, that hippie, along with Joy, went on to be a long-term friend and colleague and dear family friend. From the moment we met, David was determined to convince Joy and his boss to let him move to and work out of Whitehorse, succeeding in doing so in 1990. David was far, far ahead of the times in working out of home. Only his boss was some 3,000 plus kilometers away, and many of us were jealous of that setup. We quickly learned we shared a love of the outdoors, and we convinced Penny and Joy that a camping trip to historic Bennett City with our 4 to 7-year-old kids at the time was a great idea. Not surprisingly, on our arrival, we got grief about the logic and safety at camping amongst hundreds of pieces of broken glass and rusty tin cans found there. We survived that adventure and went on to share many river-based picnics, hikes, canoe and boat trips up and down the Yukon River. David was an excellent storyteller, not only from his historian perspective, but in the traditional sense as well. On a raft trip down the Tachishini River, David, who had a knack for getting on some pretty nice work trips, had our group roaring and laughing in stitches with tears streaming down our cheeks when he read Patrick McManus's Shooting the Chicken Out Narrows story. Perhaps that story was a premonition of a harrowing white-knuckle trip across Lake LaBarge David led us on several years later, but I don't remember that adventure being quite so funny. Whatever the case, the story's rendition became a tradition on many a Tad Alsac trip over the years, but no one ever read it quite as well as David did. Joy's sense of adventure was not to be outdone by David. As the ADM of Yukon Environment, Joy joined us on a senior level management trip down the Alsac. Participants on these trips sometimes lack the necessary travel and camping experience such trips warrant. Joy showed her peers what was needed to pitch in and help out with camp set out and takedown, meal preparation, and traveling safely in grizzly bear country. She demonstrated by example that often work hierarchies don't exist on the river, where everyone is essentially the same, and sometimes leadership roles are reversed. Rafting trips have their moments of fun, and Joy led the way again, rowing our raft across the iceberg-laden Alsac Lake, while Kevin McLaughlin and I sat perched on the front of her raft on a double-wide camp chair, enjoying a couple wobbly pops to the amusement of her peers. After all, I did say something about leadership roles being reversed. The great outdoors, the river, our friends, families, and adventures collectively were a part of our connection with David and Joy. I like to think that they are continuing their journey together in the great beyond, reconnecting with family and friends that passed before them, exploring new places and waterways while awaiting a reconnection and sharing of their new adventures with us once more at some point in the future. In the interim, let's keep them close to our hearts. Let's celebrate and cherish our memories of David and Joy and their significant contributions to their family, friends, and colleagues, and to the Yukon itself, today, tomorrow, and into the future, till our paths cross again. We miss you dearly, David and Joy. Thank you.
Joyful, joyful, we
One of the readings that Joy chose was 1 Corinthians 13, which seems to say in words what they just said in music. Like, when it comes right down to it, what counts, right? It's love. It's love and joy, and that's what. Anyway, so just some excerpts from 1 Corinthians 13. I know you know it. I could speak in the tongues of humans and of angels, but if I don't have love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. I could have faith to remove mountains. I could give away all that I have to be burned, but if I don't have love, I gain nothing. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they'll come to an end. As for tongues, they'll cease. For prophecy, it'll fade away, but when the perfect comes, the imperfect will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. But when I became an adult, I gave up childish ways. And then anyway, it ends by saying, so faith and hope and love abide, these three. And the greatest of these is love.
Well, Dave and I met in our early days in Yukon some time ago, and we were poking around the archives at the Dawson City Museum. Over the years, we've shared many family times together, and Joy and Dave were kind enough to be godparents to Bronwyn, Seamus, Henry, and Julian. So I've got a recollection or two, and I'll start with hunting and rivers. Might be a bit surprising to some folks to know that Dave was a hunter. Well, he wasn't really, but he did go hunting. From time to time, the first time I remember hunting, organizing a hunt with Dave, we were sitting around the Yukon Historical and Museums Association board table, and Tip and Dave and I decided a moose hunt would be good. A suitable extended weekend was picked, and we'd use Dave's boat, and the gear was all packed. When the day arrived, Dave was unable to come, which was disappointing for all of us, and the hunt would be off, except that without blinking, Dave offered his boat to Tip and me for the weekend. Now, Dave had never seen either Tip or I drive his boat. And we all really know that Dave took pride in his boat. I mean, he loved it. He took great care with it. In fact, on one occasion when Dave and Joy were traveling, and Dave said to me that he was going to meet his sweetie in Victoria, I said to him quite earnestly, well, how is he going to get his boat to Victoria? Anyway, it was a measure of Dave that he lent his cherished boat to Tip and me without hesitation. And it was eventually, for Tip and me, a successful hunt on the 30-mile, thanks to Dave. Anyway, after that beginning, Tip and Dave and I would do fall hunts with Dave's boat. One year, I think, Brent came along, another year, Stu. By and large, we didn't see many moose. However, we had a couple of 303s, Tip's and mine, if one did happen by. One year, the three of us set out from Johnson's Crossing, going down the Teslin. An hour or so in, we floated past a small pack of wolves on the shore. We watched each other in peaceful silence as we floated by. As we arrived at the McClintock Trail, Dave led our thoughts are thoughtful reflections on the Nantucket brothers, the 4 car-cross Tagish men caught between 2 views of justice who paid the ultimate price. Late one afternoon, we came to the broad flats above Mason's Landing, and a bull was off on the south side. Tip and I got off a number of shots with our old open sight World War I vintage 303s. The bull was not touched, escaped unscathed. The episode was recounted in Dave's blog with the concluding phrase, "And after the second shot, I was cheering for the moose." One year, late in September, Tip and I foolishly went out without Dave and some other boat. We put in at Minto to go downstream for a little bit and then back to Minto. Unfortunately, we had equipment problems and drifted for 3 days down to Dawson, arriving about dusk on a Sunday evening. And well, what do? Well, call Dave. So all we were asking him to do was hop in their van, preferably in the next half hour, drive to Minto, where it would already be dark, thrash around trying to find a trailer, which had already given Tip and me some grief, and drive to Dawson, where he would arrive close to midnight, pull a boat out of the river, and drive back to Minto and Whitehorse for work the next day. No problem. Dave cheerfully hopped in the van, likely in less than half an hour, because we were still in the downtown hotel when he arrived. The Mountie helped us pull the boat out of the river, and Dave got us back to Whitehorse sometime after first light the next morning. So, successful trip, sort of. Duck dinner. One day it happened that we had a duck breast in our larder up on our place in Wilson, and Seamus cooked it up. He baked it. It was exquisite. It was really a memorable food experience. And I mentioned this to Joy. Joy's pleasure and talent in the culinary endeavors are well known. Her interest was piqued by my enthusiasm for the duck. And over the next little while, she collected a number of packets of duck with the idea that we would have a dinner at Wilson. A day was picked. I think a couple of kids were around, maybe Julian and Henry. Dave and Joy were there, David and Linda. However, no Seamus. It's safe to say my culinary skills are maybe closer to the other side of the spectrum from Seamus's and Joy's. Anyway, not to fear, I set about following Seamus's method to recreate that outstanding duck dinner. Well, there were a few equipment problems. I think the oven was acting up, and before long that rich duck was smoking a little bit, and the smoke detectors were going off, and then the duck was smoking a bit, and the smoke detectors were going off. And then the duck was smoking a bit, and the smoke detectors were going off. I recollect the 2 Davids outside distancing from the screaming smoke detectors and leaning against Dave's boat. In the end, the meal was an unmitigated disaster. But stepping back and being a bit more objective, it was awful. Joy was completely gracious, as were the others. She had heard my rapturous description of the outstanding meal of duck, and she patiently collected a fair bit of duck, and knowing Joy, there was no stinting on the quality, and then sat very patiently through the smoke and the din and screaming smoke detectors, and just continued to be completely calm and generous and kind. Dave and Joy. Goodbye, my friends.
Well, dear friends, it is truly wonderful to be here today in this space that was so, so important to Joy and David and to many of us through the years to share so many special times. And this is one of them. And thank you so much for making it really a part of their lives and our lives here in the Yukon. So my story today is about Joy and David and all of us. And I've called it The Joy of Joy's Cooking. And if ever I knew someone who completely represents her name, it is Joy. Her joy in family, with David, her children, her grandchildren, and all who were related to her in any way as friends, adopted family, which we were all pleased to be. Her joy in all her friends, in the Yukon's beauty, and the wonders of the world far beyond, in deep and humane thinking, in art, singing, her faith, and of course, cooking. We first met Joy on her first trip to the Yukon in the summer, I think 1988. The Yukon Historical and Museums Association had been lobbying Parks Canada for over a year to relocate the Yukon historian, David, to his rightful place here. And David was lobbying hard to convince Joy that Whitehorse would be the perfect place for their family. I remembered the 4 Neufeld waters trooping down the hill to our cabin at Tahanman, Andrew toddling along, Aaron forging ahead as intrepid elder sister, and parents leading from behind. It was a stellar northern day, fireweed in full bloom, Labarge waters sparkling, and our fire pit ready for outdoor cooking. And that was the first of many, many wonderful visits together. Easter egg hunts in the snow, summer picnics, Thanksgiving feasts, and delectable goodies always from Joy's kitchen. I will always remember her coming through the cabin door with her beautiful smile, saying, "I brought a little something for the kids and something for the table." And then David appearing, loaded down with a large box full of amazing food. Now, his contribution, to be noted, was chocolate Kinder eggs at Easter to bolster the real eggs, which had always been specified as the annual egg hunt treat, and of course chocolate in some other form on all other occasions. My favorite from Joy's kitchen is her lemon roast potatoes. And I have the original recipe she brought to me after my repeated ravings over these sensational potatoes. It is truly archival now, decorated with splatters and the tests of time, as I tried to achieve Joy's potato perfection. But the reality is that, like all brilliant cooks, she brought some magical touch to this simple recipe, and I have yet to reach that lofty peak. When Aaron suggested I share the recipe today, I looked closely again at the original and realized that, like all archival sources, this small piece of paper carries many special features revealed through careful study and reflection. Joy annotated it to encourage extra portions of oregano and rosemary, which she grew in her garden. And she properly credited the original source, Canadian Living, a magazine she loved. She printed it on recycled paper, in keeping with her commitment to the environment. And it just happened to be a draft of David's research on the dew line. And so here we have Joy's kitchen and David's research preserved and wrapped in stories and memories to take us forward through the months and years as we heal from the loss of our 2 dear friends. I hope you enjoy Joy's lemon roast potatoes soon and share them generously along with stories when you gather with friends, as Joy and David always did. And there are copies of this wonderful archival document on the back table. And Aaron will hopefully post it if I can figure out how to put it all together in one document. Thank you so much for this very special day.
Oh, all the money that e'er I spent it in good company, and all the harm that e'er I've done, alas, it was to none but me. And all I've done for want of wit, to memory now I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night, and joy be with you all. Oh, all the comrades that e'er I've had are sorry for my going away, and all the sweethearts that e'er I've had would wish me one more day to stay. But since it calls unto my lot that I should rise and you should not, I'll gently rise and I'll softly call. Good night, and joy be with you all. Good night, and joy be with you all. With you all.
I just couldn't think of a lovelier way to celebrate David and Joy. And it's such an honor to be here with the stories that are being shared. It's a wonderful confluence of people and memories, so thank you. And in the theme of the river state of mind that I feel we've been brought to with this lovely service, I wanted to read a poem. And in light of Joy and David's passing, I feel like this poem resonates in a different way for me than it has in the past. It's titled Riverine, which means relating to, formed by, or resembling a river. Where the Nesutlan grew shallow and swift, we rested our paddles on the gunnels, only dipping them to steer. We watched the riverbed, the astonishing velocity of the round green boulders passing beneath us, and the red-backed spawners slipping upstream through the shadows cast by clouds. And the kingfisher we startled into flight, gliding furtively from one sweeper to the next, while the small bruin raised its snout in the air and, catching our scent, turned back into the forest as we drifted by and around the bend.
Nice campfire, Jana. Beautiful. Thank you so much for asking me to take part and allowing me to tell a story. How did I first meet David anyways? I seem to remember a park bench, maybe near the corner of Main and Front Streets. I remember finding myself inside an interesting conversation and then wondering, who was that mustachioed man? So I was glad when I heard the Trundaquitchin had honored David with a bench, because David loved stories and loved conversation. He was a good listener and a good storyteller and thought hard about what storytelling meant. He wondered how to make a good common space between all of us here in the Yukon by means of the stories we celebrate and how we tell them. The stories will build the bench, and the bench will support the stories. Who here has had an interesting ad hoc conversation with David? It might be easier to ask who not, right? Even like in Whitehorse. His interest made us all more interesting. David seemed to me to be one of the most conversationally available people that I know. But as far as I know, only to Joy was he available for dancing. My mom and I went to the Commissioner's Ball in Dawson with Joy and David. We went partly because Joy and David were going, and I knew they would be such good company. In explaining his attendance at the ball to an elder, I think it was maybe Percy Henry, David shrugged and said, "Well, my wife wants to dance." With his Mennonite roots, David was a reluctant dancer. But I remember David and Joy dancing to the Proclaimers, "I Would Walk 500 Miles," and David giving it his best because Joy loved that song. David kind of danced in conversation and in his boat. Okay, maybe the dancing thing is a bit of a reach, but that boat of his was a method of thinking, of historical research, of embodying knowledge of place, and of understanding the river and the natural world as beings with agency. His relationship with boating also created common ground for dialogue with elders like Percy and Victor Henry. He wrote a paper on learning from them how to navigate the moving islands in the Yukon River. I very much recommend it. I was gonna have links, but I thought, contact. So there's a bowl with little slips of paper with the link at the Moving Islands room at the Yukon Artists at Work Gallery, or just ask me and I'm happy to send it to you. When I was painting Canada's highways, David said, "You should paint the river. That used to be the highway, you know." And so I had the privilege of boating with him from Lake Labarge to Carmacks. The river and the landscape itself were active collaborators in the paintings that we made. And so in his way was David. It takes about 3 hours for me to do an oil painting in this style. David artfully tarped structures for me to shelter under, looking in the direction I chose to paint. I will treasure the memory of this courtesy. Another trip at Fort Selkirk, I sat down in the boat to paint. Leaving my paints, I walked my delicate wet painting up the cliff to set it safely in its box to dry. David noticed a raven down by the boat. We rushed down there to the river. The raven had walked through my oil paint and then walked over the boat's varnished wooden gunnels. I apologized and went to clean it, but David said, "No, are you kidding? I have an original raven painting here." Joy picked us up off the river at Carmacks. When I came out of the bathroom in the gas station, she said, "Did you enjoy washing your hands?" I hadn't really paid attention. I went back and enjoyed the feeling of washing my hands in the warm water. Smart lady. It's a good time, really, to all really enjoy washing our hands. I would invite everyone here to celebrate the gifts that David and Joy gave us, and to do our best to really receive them, to bring what we loved about them into this world. Joy's steady strength and remembering to take pleasure in things, and David's blend of delight and responsibility. Let's each carry our own stories of them with us and find ways to share them with other people as we all navigate together this Yukon River of conversation. Thank you.
As I'm sure you all know, Joy and David's daughter, Erin, is married to my son, Stephen. And we shared 3 wonderful grandchildren, Hector, Finley, and Hugo. Closer? Okay. So early on in Erin and Stephen's relationship, Joy and I bonded over sharing intelligence about what they were up to. That appalled the children, as I'm sure you can well imagine. However, we didn't stop. The practice continued all through the years, and our typical greeting whenever we saw each other at choir or at church or anywhere else was, "Have you heard from the kids lately?" And then we would each recount what we knew. In addition to pooling the information we had, we also shared in the joy of their marriage, in the sadness when they opted to leave the country to move to New Zealand, and then in the great delight of grandkids. We managed to negotiate our trips to New Zealand such that we would each have our own time with the family. But we also overlapped so that we would have time together, and we had a number of adventures together in New Zealand and elsewhere. And over the course of that time, we developed a real friendship as well as our family connection. One of the directions that friendship took was in our love of music, and a lot of the music that we have heard today was music that Joy and I sang as well. So I wanted to tell you about one summer when the Persephones, one of the choirs that we were in, went to a music festival in Powell River. And while most of the choir members opted to fly down and travel to Powell River that way, Joy and I opted to take a road trip. So we traveled down together, and that was a real comfort to me because I had planned to do the drive anyway, and it was great to have her company. So there was one point where we were traveling a stretch of very narrow and very rough road in pouring rain, and we overtook another vehicle. So I pulled out to pass, and suddenly there was this great noise and wild flapping sound coming from her side of the car, and I just panicked. I didn't know what on earth was going on, and Joy said, "Just keep going." And that was so Joy. So I think that basically she kept us on the road, and when we stopped and discovered that there was a piece of sort of rubber weather stripping along the side of the windshield that had suddenly come loose and was the cause of the problem, we fixed it. And that was also very much like Joy. I think that just keep going spirit was what Joy brought to every day of her life, including after her diagnosis of cancer. Joy kept contributing to the community. She kept on singing. She started to learn to play bridge last winter. She just never stopped learning. She just kept going. And my wish for all of us really is that we can bring that spirit to our own lives and honor her in that way. I also had a friendship with David. And I realized that many of us had a friendship that was built around river trips and boating. And that was very much the case with us as well. There were just a number of incidents that came to mind as I reflected on David and our boating adventures. One was an early season boating trip, a canoe trip on the Yukon River when we hadn't quite figured out the currents in the river yet. They were a little bit different at low water, which led to us was making a sudden decision about making a turn and taking a different direction on a stretch of river and ending up with a boat half full of water. But we were upright. There was that. There was a trip on Lake Labarge one time. David took me out in his riverboat. It was a point that was kind of a low point in my life, and I think that David knew that and was giving me this gift, really, as a way of cheering me up. I think that boating was a gift that David gave to a lot of us. There was another occasion when David was taking another group out on the river trip from Minto, and I was recruited to do the shuttle with the boat and the trailer and the car. Only when we got to Minto, David realized that he'd forgotten the life jackets. And so we all just turned around and shuttled right back to Whitehorse instead of getting onto the river. There was a really very memorable trip with Joy and David and Andrew on the Whanganui River in New Zealand. The Neufelds had done that trip previously with Aaron and assured me that it was just a lovely, lovely float on a beautiful river, and I believed them. There were 47 sets of rapids between the put-in and the first campsite. I don't do rapids. Past tense, I didn't do rapids. Oh dear. Boating with David was always an adventure. It was always fun, and as I say, it was a gift that he shared with many of us. This past summer, David is spending all of his time with Joy and wasn't able to be on the water. And on my last visit with him at their home, I had just come back from a kayaking trip on Lake Labarge. And when I let David know that, it wasn't enough just to know that we'd been out for 4 days. He wanted to know all the details. He wanted to know where we'd camped. He wanted to know what the grizzly bear looked like when we'd seen that in the hills. He wanted to know about the wind and the weather and about the crossings. It was the story that he wanted me to share, and it was such a privilege to have that opportunity to share a story with David, as it is a privilege to be here now. Thank you.
River running in you and me, spirit of life, deep mystery, dancing down to the holy sea. River run deep, river run free. River laughed on my birthing day, wind and water joined in play, soaked my soul in a shining spray. River run deep, river run free. River cry my name to me, lend me hope and memory, sing me the story of the holy sea. River run deep, river run free. I stand on the edge looking down, too scared to swim, afraid I'll drown. Give me the courage to journey on. River run deep, river run free. journey on far from my home. River, break this heart of stone. Teach me to love, make me your own. River, run deep, river, run free. Hold me close on the day I die. Bear me up when my soul is tired. Carry me home on the rising tide. River, run deep, river, run free. River singing in you and me. Spirit of life, deep mystery. Catch us up in your melody. River, run deep, river, run free.
Zanya Shulkwathan, Ayinji Karen, Uye, Kwanlin Ninji, Shonithan Anne-Marie Miller for helping me with that introduction. I'm really honored to live on the traditional territory of the Ta'anguchen Council and the Kwanlin Dun First Nation, and I know that David and Joy were so grateful to be able to make their home and raise their children here too. Yeah, as many of you know, I wouldn't be living in Whitehorse if it wasn't for David and Joy's help and advice. These days I often feel like I'm walking in their steps, not just because I'm a historian for Parks Canada like David was, but also because they introduced me to so much of what I love about Whitehorse. Everything from friends and coworkers to local trails on the Yukon River, and to small businesses that they supported. And I know that in small and big ways, David and Joy helped so many people who are here today and watching online. I was really honored to be asked to speak today. I once told David that one of the reasons I like being a historian so much is because I get to listen to other people's stories. And he responded that it's just as important to share our own stories because that mutual sharing is how we connect with people. And I have often thought back on how wise that advice was and just how good David was at putting it into practice. And so oral storytelling isn't something that comes naturally to me like I think it did to David, but I'm working on it. And so it was extra special for me to be asked to speak today and have a chance to follow through on his advice. About 3 years ago, so almost exactly 3 years ago, I came to Whitehorse on a work trip. It was November 2017. And I was staying with Kate and Lisa in Whitehorse. I lived in Calgary at the time. And when Kate and Lisa were at choir practice with Joy on Saturday afternoon, I met up with David for a walk. And at David's suggestion, we walked through the woods near his house down to just where the little Takini Creek flows into the Yukon River. And it had snapped cold the week before, and when we got to the river, there was an open spot and steam was just pouring off it. And we stood there and watched and listened to the ice, and I remember that David was just so completely enthralled by it, even though he had seen freeze up here so many times before. And I really remember him like that, just so full of amazement and awe and wonder at the world. And this week I tried to go back and walk to that same spot. I got pretty lost, but I ended up there in the end. And it was, even though it was almost exactly the same date, it was a very different day. There was a lot of low cloud and snow drifts and just heavy, heavy falling snow. And it was one of those days where there's so much swirling whiteness all around you that you can almost feel untethered. And it was so beautiful. And I thought about how David went back over and over again to the same places, and he really appreciated how they stayed the same and how they changed. And also, yeah, just, sorry, I think I need my notes. This is more emotional than I thought. And yeah, so I just remember I was thinking about how much he loved the river in all seasons and how he loved learning how people connected with it and helping people to connect with it. And he also understood that the river is what makes life possible for all of us here. Soon after David passed away, I had a dream about that same spot. And the dream started like a normal work dream. I was sitting at home at my computer looking at my Outlook calendar, and I saw that I had an appointment with David on the calendar that day, and I thought, oh, in the dream, I thought, oh, that's a mistake. I got to take that off. And then for some reason in the dream, I decided to go to the meeting anyway. And we had arranged to meet at that spot on the Yukon River by Little Takini Creek. And it was fall in the dream, and it was like the leaves were really bright and the river was running. And when I got there in the dream, David was there, and he said that he was hoping I would come because he wanted to tell me that sometimes in the future I'll find that I just know an answer to something to do with Yukon history that I shouldn't know, and that would be him giving me that answer. And I woke up from the dream feeling really comforted. I can't say that I've had any unexplained answers appear in my head yet, but it made me realize that David and Joy are still mentors to me, and that I'm still learning from the way that they lived their life with so much generosity and kindness and compassion. And I know that I'm not the only one. Shonithan Masicho, thank you.
So Andrew and I got some emails from Dad's brothers and Mom's sister, and we wanted to read what they wrote. So this is from Jane, who's in Toronto. Or no, not in Toronto anymore. In Ontario. I wish I could be with you in person to share in the celebration of Joy and David, but these times are trying. There are blessings in every storm. As I write this, I am waiting. For the arrival of my first grandchild. I'm really sorry. One thing my sister and I shared was a love of cooking and baking. Unlike Joy, my love doesn't always transfer into skill. We did, however, share the ability to make a huge mess when cooking, which I have also learned to do. I use many recipes Joy and David share with me. David's raisin bran muffin, I'm sure familiar with many of you, is a favorite in our household. Decadent rich chocolate brownies is my personal favorite, which I believe actually came from Erin Stephen. But Joy wrote it down, so I'm giving her credit. During Joy's visits, going to St. Lawrence Market was an outing I looked forward to. The night before, family members were reminded to be up bright and early, ready to go so we would beat the rush. We usually ended up leaving an hour later than planned, just Joy and I. We had a market routine. I remember once David accompanied us, and was very quickly we had to set him straight about our strict market regiment that he was not to interfere with. At the market, our first order of business was eating. We couldn't resist those delicious, famous pea meal bacon breakfast sandwiches. After that, we were ready to shop. Joy was always thoughtful of others. She visited the cheese stalls where she picked up David's favorites, and sometimes we searched for Japanese items for Andrew. Joy also got to know what my family enjoyed and made sure we got apple cheddar cheese for Annie, dill pickles for Corrine, apple strudel for Jack, and butter tarts for Chris. No one was left out. She even made sure there was a bone for the dog. Joy couldn't walk past the Coslick gourmet mustards, where they gave you samples on pea meal bacon without buying. 5 jars for $20. Such a good deal. That's why we always had loads of mustard in our fridge. She liked them so much that she had stockpiled quite a few at home and had to be reminded by David, we don't need any more mustard. Maple syrup was frequently on Joy's shopping list, and at the end of our trip, we would pick up the largest jugs available. They were not easy to carry as we made our way back to the car, double-fisted, loaded with groceries and maple syrup jugs bumping on our knees. When we arrived home around lunchtime, my children, who probably just got out of bed, were quick to swoop in and see what we bought and complain about what we didn't. Finally, it was time to sit, relax, and enjoy our treats with a cup of tea. At the end of Joy's stay, the night before departure, we scurried around making sure all her purchases made it into her suitcase. Using her trusty hand scale, she checked the weight of her bag, making sure it didn't go over the limit. I'm sure the check-in attendants at the airport wondered what she was carrying in that funky-smelling, bulging, heavy suitcase. When asked to give advice on dealing with his struggles with cancer, songwriter Warren Zevon stated he had learned to take the time to enjoy every sandwich. I think Joy and David would agree, especially ones with summer sausage on hearty bread from Alpine Bakery and, of course, mustard. Warren Zevon also wrote a beautiful song, Keep Me in Your Heart, which makes me reminisce of Joy and David and our extended families and friends. The following lines connect with me the most. Sometimes when you're doing simple things around the house, maybe you'll think of me and smile. You know I'm tied to you like buttons on your blouse. Keep me in your heart for a while. Hold me in your thoughts. Take me in your dreams. Touch me as I fall into view when the winter comes. Keep the fires lit, and I will be right next to you.
I have some stories that my dad's brother Dick decided to share. There are too many memories and stories of my brother to be stated in an hour service, but things from childhood that I remember are his model plane flying. Don't know why, but Frank Lots resonates, probably because of the cabin he had in the Interlake region, where I recall a lot of stories originated from. Most of them not shareable, but memorable. And of course, the famous hockey story where life portrayed Dave as a goalie as he faced a wicked slap shot from the 8-year-old opposition late in the game. He proceeded to poop his hockey pants and turned around in fear and saved the shot with the back of his head. He was the hero of the game. Dad was so proud. All of these and plenty more will be retained forever for me. Kick the Wall contest also will never be forgotten, where the older brothers, Pete and Dave, would see who could kick the wall hardest with a bare foot between Jeff and myself. Despite watching the first contender break down crying, the other knew he could do better. It ended up with Jeff and I crying and Pete and Dave laughing. The real sad part of this contest was that I recall it being repeated periodically after painful memories had eroded enough to duplicate the exact same contest again. Brothers.
Thank you all so much for your stories, for the ones shared here today, and the many shared with us online, through email, text, or in person. Each is a precious moment shared and helps to make Mom and Dad real. I don't know what to say really to wrap everything up in a neat little bow and have it all make sense. I don't think there are words for that. The grief and turmoil that fills my heart is just a reflection of the love I feel for Mom and Dad. And looking at everyone here and with us online fills me with the love that they put out into the world. They were amazing people, rich in friends and even richer in stories. Every memory, every anecdote builds into the story of their lives and reminds us of the many gifts that they have given us, the delicious meals, the amazing boat trips, the music and the laughter. They taught us how to look deeper and find the stories that aren't yet being heard and how to champion them. They have not only made the world a better place through their actions, they have made us all better people to continue changing the world for them and for us all.
And finally, a reading that our mom had saved in her book. In the end, I'm only going next door, to the end of the corridor, into my favorite room. And from there, out into the garden. From there, I will become light and go wherever I want. I will sit out there sometimes in the evening and look at the house we lived in together. I see you, my beloved husband, roaming through some rooms. You're searching for me. I'm no longer in the sealed rooms, of course. Look at me, out here. Think of me and call my name. None of this is any less real because I am gone. Death doesn't matter. It makes no difference to life. We will always remain what we were to one another. Thank you.
So here's what I've come to in the end. The world is a good gift from a good God. And that's hard to hang on to because it can be painful, the world, and confusing, and you watch the news and you want to scream or weep. At the best of times, it's complicated and busy, and a person could forget. A person could forget the truth of the goodness and what's most important. And it seems to me that this is an occasion to remember, to go deep beneath the surface as you've done, where all the good stuff lurks, waiting for our attention. And it seems to be saying here and now, it's time to be enchanted again. Because when life is hard, a person could forget that people, individuals, can honestly, truly change the world. Forget that hope is an authentic stance, that love is real. It's real. It's not a fool's dream. It's not the posture of losers. Love is real, and there are good people in the world, and there is a spirit and a force and a power and a heartbeat pulsing in all of creation, moving us, urging us toward what's real and true and right. And if you're someone who has forgotten that, and if you've built up some rough edge of despair or cynicism, and if you're tempted to look at these deaths and say, then what's the point? If you're someone whose attitude to life is whatever, if that's you, then I wish for you a softening. And I pray that you can be here in the presence of compassionate, faithful people and in the face of the deaths of two amazing people and say that life is precious and holy and there are good people in the world. There's two of them right there. And that you'll let their lives and their deaths help you to see that so that you can go from here and do your thing, to, be kind to someone close to you. I don't know, pick up some litter, take a bag of food to the food, whatever you do. Call someone you always meant to call. It is time to be enchanted again. The world is a good gift, and so are you. And I pray that you'll find a good and an honorable response to this, one that honors them in a respectful way, in a true way. Because it's tempting and easy to indulge in withdrawal. But I challenge you not to give in to that, because that's not going to help you, and it's not going to help them. It's not going to honor them. We can't indulge in cheap and cynical apathy or a failure of nerve in the face of this. Let Joy and David call you to live forward and boldly, because you know how much you've lost. And I pray that you'll live as though life is a gift and a miracle, because it is. And so in the leaving and in the letting go, let there be this to hold on to at the last. The endurance of love, the persistence of hope, the offering of gratitude, the receiving of grace, and the gift of peace, because we are not alone. We live in God's world, and all the death that ever was set next to life would scarcely fill a cup. Let's go from here in peace. Amen.
Take me where the loons are calling, mist in the morning, smell of pine. Whiskey Jack, wave me up, send me out with a fishing line. Give me a canoe and let me go out past Waskasoo to the Wabanoo. Give me a canoe and let me go. Take me where the loons are calling, lake like glass in a starlit sky. Smell of a small campfire burning, sit and watch the embers die. Give me a canoe and let me go out past Waskasoo to the Wabanoo. Give me a canoe and let me go out past Waskasoo